Hi, I'm Dr. Mike, and welcome to NFGeeks. Well, this video is the first video of a series of videos dedicated to William Shakespeare. It's Shakespeare Week this week on the NFGeeks Facebook forum, as it is on the channel. And it's a celebration of who I consider to be perhaps one of the most important NFs in all of human history, William Shakespeare. In terms of what it means to be an NF, what an NF is capable of, what an NF can give to the world, and how the whole world can share in it. So it's a whole sort of celebration of William Shakespeare, and I hope to do a whole bunch of videos this week, one each day, ideally, about something Shakespearean, you know, one of the plays or whatever. And this is the first one to kick us off, and it's really sort of an explanation of why I'm doing this and what do I think about William Shakespeare and what's the whole point of it. That's the point of this first video. And there's many reasons why I wanted to do this. I've been thinking about doing Shakespeare Week for such a long time. I'm glad I finally got around to doing it. So I'm very excited to do it. And there's one overall reason that I want to do it, that there will be other sort of themes connected to in the future, I hope, with NFGeeks and NFGeeks videos. And that is taking personality type into academia through the humanities. This is something I haven't talked about yet, but actually this was the point of my whole dissertation to get my my PhD. Most of the time we think about personality type in terms of coming back into academia, those who think it should, I'm one of them. Usually we think of psychology, that it should be a part of psychology and personality theory or organizational psychology or therapy. I agree with all of that. And the social sciences, and then of course there's always the neurology route. Someone's always taking the neurology route, try to get it into a materialism, you know. And those are all valid routes, but I think the other option, which is to bring personality type into the humanities as a tool for critique within the humanities, is also just as valid, and honestly might work better than the other fields, because humanities doesn't have some sort of chip on its shoulder about MBTI or the scientific method or anything like that. So one of the things I would like to do, and I think I'm really well suited for, because a lot of my education, my professional education, is in the humanities. My PhD is in the humanities. One of my master's degrees is in the humanities. Would be to bring Shakespeare in that route into academia. My dissertation was about that. Now, normally, when personality type comes into, or Carl Jung actually comes into academia, it's usually in the philosophy of mind. You know, what is the mind and what is consciousness and things like that. Usually stuff of philosophy. And that's actually my dissertation, again, was very much about that, sort of the philosophy of collective consciousness. But I would like to try to take personality type and have some fun with it in terms of literature, and specifically Shakespeare, for this series of videos. And I think that the humanities can be the true home of personality type, maybe. And maybe that's where it belongs, as a tool of critique of literature, of philosophy, of art. You know, maybe it would have a better home there than it is, you know, always being rejected in the social sciences. So that's one reason why I'm doing this. It's a sort of like bring personality type into the humanities, or bring the humanities to personality type. If we look at it from our point of view, people who are into personality type, try to bring the humanities into this, as opposed to always, you know, psychology and the 5-factor model and neurology, and, you know, try to bring something new to it. I hope to do other videos that relate humanities to personality type in the future as well, and try to make that connection. So this is the first set of that. So now, why Shakespeare? I think Shakespeare is perhaps one of the most important NFs in the history of the world. Perhaps in the top 5, certainly in the top 3, maybe even in the number 1 slot, you know, depending, but certainly extremely important. And what's important about him is that he basically opens a window into the human condition in ways that other people don't, other writers, other philosophers, other scientists, whatever. He basically opens a window into the human psyche, into the human soul, into the human condition, through his ability to use his NF talents to its highest potential. I would say he's a high potential NF, using his talents very, very actualized, in a very actualized way, and in doing so is able to really bring out what's it mean to be human in all these different ways. And that's what NFs do. That's what we're really good at, you know, bringing that I into the human condition. And by his ability to do that, and to do it through theater, through literature, through plays, which is also very NF, really makes him quite special. That through his craft, his very NF craft, he is able to open a window into the human condition that all types can share in. And that's very, very, very unique in the way that he does it, because he does it to a certain level of perfection that is unmatched, I would say, and a certain level of depth that, to this day we're still talking about 400 years later, literally 400 years later we're still talking about. So that's pretty impressive that he can do that. And I consider him to be an NF hero. So let's talk about his NF status first of all. Very much so. So I definitely am attributing that Shakespeare is an NF, very much an NF. I would say he symbolizes NF as much as Albert Einstein symbolizes NT. And in many ways, Einstein, and this is a whole other bunch of NTs that do this, but I'm just using Einstein as an obvious example, does the same thing, opens the window into the universe, into reality, from an objective point of view that we all can share in and sort of be amazed in the wonder of general relativity and special relativity and all of that, through seeing the world that Einstein opened up for us. And therefore, in the way he opened up it, which was very NT, obviously, so we all get to sort of share in that. And therefore, Einstein becomes a great symbol of NT, and all of that brings about. I would say that Shakespeare, it does the same thing for NF, just as much so. So I am giving him an NF status, absolutely. One of the arguments, and in fact, this is where you can use typology as an interesting way of interpreting things, because one of the arguments that goes on in academia, it's sort of a fringe argument, but many people are aware of it, is, did Shakespeare actually write these plays? That's a common one. And there's a whole, field called anti-Stratfordians who believe that Shakespeare didn't write these plays. It was somebody else. Okay. And one of the people they give is Sir Francis Bacon. Okay, it was a contemporary of Shakespeare. Now, Sir Francis Bacon is very important to the Enlightenment and to the scientific method and the introduction of the scientific method and the idea that science and induction should be part of the university world beyond just scholasticism. And this is very true for Britain, where he was from, and he set the stage for English Enlightenment, which opened the doors to all the British empiricists and the British atheists, because he was kind of atheist, and he had this sort of very important vision of creating science in order to tap the power of nature, very, very NT. But Sir Francis Bacon, being an NT, is very unlikely the author of any Shakespearean play, any one Shakespearean play, let alone the totality of the Shakespearean plays, which all seem to take place entirely within an NF universe. And that's one of the things, I want to point out, is that throughout the week, is that everything that takes place in a Shakespeare play is taking place almost in some sort of NF world, where everybody speaks NF and everybody is sort of hyperbolic in an NF way. It takes place in an NF universe, and through that NF lens, you see reality in a certain way, So I give him an NF status, and again, what is the evidence? I would say the entire first folio. All of the plays. Everything that goes on in these plays. Would any of the other types, with an SJ or an NT, write a play about fairies, a fairy king and gets his trickster fairy to use like love potion on people's eyes to get everyone falling in love with somebody else who they're not supposed to be falling in love with? I don't know how many NT plays are about that, but I know a lot of NFs. That's all that's going on all the time. So there's a lot to say about how NF all the plays actually are. They're all taking place in this NF universe. The real question is, what NF was he? I think, and I think there is an argument that he could be any one of the four NFs. That you could make an argument, because all of the NFs care about the things that go on in Shakespeare plays, all of the values, all of the points of the plays, all of the style of the writing, the analysis of the relationships. Any NF, I think, can get into Shakespeare, and so I think that it could be argued that any NF, he could be any NF, but I'm going to go with sort of the traditional INFP, that Shakespeare is an INFP. INFP first, ENFP second, and then INFJ, ENFJ. I think ENFJ is least likely, okay, of it. But if somebody had an argument, I'd be willing to listen for it. But I think INFP. And I think INFP for two reasons. One, I definitely think he was an NFP. And I think he was an NFP because one of the differences between NFJ writing and NFP writing is NFJ writes stories about individuals that are exemplifying some greater point about humanity, reality, the universe, whatever. So there's some greater point being made, and the characters in the story are meant to symbolize this greater point that's going on. So whatever is being written, there's some larger thing going on with it. about it. On the other hand, NFP is right opposite, and I know because I do this. We take these much larger, greater points that are very, very serious, but really it's all about the individual experience of what's going on and how these greater things are surrounding them and affecting them, for better or for worse. And all of Shakespeare's plays are of the second kind, okay, meaning that they're not really about these much greater ideas about humanity. And those things are definitely in play, and they're in there in ways that are fascinating. But it's really not about these big ideas. It's really about these individuals suffering through these experiences. The Merchant of Venice makes a lot of questions about what does it mean to be anti-Semitic or Semitic, or has us question all these things about being Jewish and justice and vengeance and all that. But really, it's not about being Jewish or being an anti-Semite or justice or vengeance. It's about Shylock and Antonio and them wrestling through this weird situation that they're both embroiled in. It's really about these individuals. So the story is really, all the plays are really about the individuals sort of suffering through with these larger things in play. But it's really about them, and that's a very NFP thing to do. So that's one thing I do for me that makes me think that he's an NFP. Now, I say INFP for a couple of reasons. One is that I think he's an INFP because we really don't know a lot about Shakespeare beyond the plays. We know that he wrote the plays. I'm not an anti-Stratfordian, that's stupid. There's plenty of evidence that he wrote these plays and whatever. But we know that he was part of the King's Men and the Lord Chamberlain's Men, and we know that he wrote these plays, and he knows that he was married on a certain date. But beyond like that, we don't know anything about him. It's a mystery. His personal life is a mystery. And there's something INFP about that INFPs create something great into the world, and it exists in the world, and this thing is known, and they are known because this great thing exists. But what they're all about and what they were like as people gets lost. It's mysterious, because they're INFPs, and they're sort of behind it all, sort of in the shadow. They're not out in the front doing it, and they don't want to be out in the front doing it. They want their thing to be out in the front. So, they sort of get lost. Some examples I thought about with this is that if he was an ENFP, like myself, there'd be all these anecdotes about him and his antics, like there are about me. Some true, some false, some half true, some positive, some negative. But there'd be all these sort of little anecdotes and things about him as a person that just doesn't exist. There's no little anecdotes about Shakespeare, about the strength of his personality. That kind of tells me he's not an ENFP. I think if he was an ENFP, there'd be these little stories, floating around, even rumors, legends. There'd be something. There's nothing. It's just sort of empty. I also think, going back to the anti-Stratfordians, is that the idea that you can take away, like his role in the play, I think is very INFP. I think because he's sort of not a strong personality, it's easy to say he didn't write these things. Because there's sort of a vacuum there. And also there's not the personality defending it. And it kind of reminded me of Isabel Myers' role with personality type. Isabel, what do we know about Isabel Myers? Well, she was married to the ISTJ guy. She had an ENFP son. There's Catherine Briggs. Beyond that, what do we know about her life? Really, about her, her story. We really don't know a lot. But we know a whole lot about the system she created and the typology and the inventory. And we know all about that. And there's always this denial of her, that somehow she is not the most important one, even though she obviously is the most important one because we're all in her world, no matter what you're into, really, she's the one who made this what it is, and we're all walking in her universe. But yet there's always this denial of her greatness, there's always this that she's not really the one and she didn't really do it. Same thing seems to happen with Shakespeare. And I think it's for the same reason. I think it's because he's an INFP and his personality isn't strongly being put out there. He didn't do it. He didn't strongly put his personality out there that he was the one with these plays and all that. He just wanted the plays to be big. So that seemed very INFP to me. It's sort of the fact that he's missing in terms of his personality behind all this. Another thing that this is comical and small, but one thing that made me think about that he's an INFP is that there's various INFP moments throughout the plays, to the point where there might be some kind of Mary Sue stuff going on in these Shakespeare plays. I never thought about that before until now. But one of the things that happened when I was sort of doing my studying for this is that at the end of the Midsummer Night's Dream, that's actually the play with the fairies and the love potion. The trickster fairy Puck comes out at the end, and he sort of he addresses the audience and he apologizes for the play, sort of. If you read his last sort of soliloquy or whatever to the audience. He says, I'm sorry, this is just, if we offended you, this is just shadows. He's sort of saying, hey, if you didn't like the play, I'm sorry, it's just a play, and I hope we still could be friends. And he's sort of saying this to the audience, and I thought, what an INFP thing to say. INF Puck coming out and sort of apologizing to the audience for the play just in case they didn't like it. So I'm sorry if you didn't like it. That seemed very INFP to me. And it didn't seem very ENFP, because I thought to myself, if I was writing Midsummer Night's Dream, what would happen is Puck would come out at the end of the play and say to everybody, hey, wasn't that just the most awesome play? Yeah, I know, I loved it too. Puck would sort of just immediately assume it was awesome, no matter how the performance actually went. So let's assume it was terrible. Doesn't matter. It was totally awesome. It was great. You loved it. He loved it. Everybody loved it. And because I would think that's funny that he would do that. But the fact that sort of Puck sort of comes out and apologizes for the play seemed very sort of INFP to me, and that's kind of funny. So I'm giving him INFP. Now, typology, in terms of where it is in Shakespeare, is really fascinating, in my opinion, where I think it is. And it's not that the types are within the play. It's really that Shakespeare is a very strong NF and is using his NF powers very strongly. And where type is in any Shakespeare is in the NF-ness of everything that's being done, in the ability to see motivations, and the ability to see relationships, and the ability to see how relationships transform people for better and for worse, the arcs that people go to. I think type is in the play, in that Shakespeare's NF-ness is sort of everywhere shaping everything, and that's where you can see it. As opposed to what type, Brutus is, and Cassius, and, and Mark Antony, that kind of thing. Although, we'll talk about some of that, and that's in there, but I think it's really stronger that Shakespeare as an NF, that the NF-ness of everything is very strong, is where type is actually at its foremost. And it's interesting, too, because one of Shakespeare's contemporaries, who was actually considered to be better than him at the time, because he was a little more upper class, I think, is a guy named Ben Jonson, who wrote plays. And Ben Jonson was into, guess what, the humors, the prototype of type, of typology, being, melancholic or choleric or whatever, the things that sort of eventually evolved into the temperaments and all that. He's sort of into type in a way, or the whatever was considered type at that time, to be type in the Elizabethan era. And he was, so in his plays, the characters had a specific humor, like a temperament, and then they sort of stuck with that through the whole time, and that was what was motivating them through the whole play. Whereas Shakespeare, it's very, very specific, person-specific. The motivations of each person is specific to that person, and is very situational. It's almost anti-type in a way, in that sense. So I don't think that's where type is to be found or to be used with Shakespeare. It's actually to see Shakespeare as an NF, using his NF powers to create this NF world, and how NF is sort of involved in all this. I think that's where you find type. I think the type is found in him, not necessarily within the characters that are going on, although, again, there'll be plenty of that. And to show that, there's lots of NF stuff going on within Shakespearean plays, okay? There's in terms of where NF is found, or the language of the play is very NF. It's all very interpretive, metaphoric, lots of hyperbole throughout Shakespeare. I mean, everybody's speaking NF in Shakespeare, the whole time. Shakespeare dances between that NF credulism and also tragedy. Tragedy is the depressed version of NF. I would say when NFs are trying to be realists, they end up becoming tragedists. That's what they really are. They don't actually becoming realists, because there would be this dispassion, and there's no dispassion. So everything in Shakespeare goes back and forth between sort of this wonderful, credulous, wonderful, everybody lives happily ever after, to NF tragedy stuff. There's all sorts of NF moments going on throughout Shakespeare plays, where people just sort of magically know things. Characters are on various transformative journeys. And the transformative journeys run in both directions. That's what I like about it. Sometimes the transformative journey is to their demise. It's just as much a transformative journey. And there are catalysts, people playing as catalysts to it. One of the interesting things about Shakespeare plays is that the characters themselves worry about the fates and God and metaphysics and fortune and luck. But if you step back and you look at what's going on, Shakespeare himself doesn't believe in any of that. Shakespeare obviously believes that tragedy befalls us because of the human condition and human relations and people making moral choices within that and people making stupid choices within those choices and all that, that it's all about the human condition and it's not these metaphysical forces at all. But still, the idea of mystical forces is in there, which is quite fascinating. And there's also the issues of being authentic, being true to oneself, and what does it mean to be true, and who's being true, and are they really being true? And there's all these layers of that. And of course, there's love and romance and soulmates. There's soulmates throughout the plays, and that's one of the things I really appreciate about Shakespeare's soulmates, even evil soulmates. Lady Macbeth and Macbeth are soulmates. For better or for worse, they really are. They belong with each other right to the end. I mean, they do. They were meant to be together. No question about that, you know. That's what I hope to bring out, sort of the NF-ness of everything, and point to how typology can be used to see how, through Shakespeare's NF abilities, all these ideas about the human condition are opened up to all of us to enjoy. So NF itself becomes a window. Shakespeare's an NF, and his ability becomes a window for us, to all of us, to see the human condition. That's what I hope to show. So lastly, let me give some advice about watching Shakespeare before we go, because I recommend that you watch as much Shakespeare as possible this week, if you can. So the first thing is, because a lot of people are all upset about it, the language and whatever, or, you know, because we all have these bad experiences. I'm going to talk about that. I'm talking about Romeo and Juliet, my own bad experience reading Shakespeare in high school. The first thing I recommend is that you take, when you watch Shakespeare, put on the subtitles or the closed caption for the hearing impaired or whatever, okay, so that you actually have text underneath, so that you're watching it and reading it at the same time. That actually helps, so that if you don't understand what's going on, what you're seeing, you can read, and if you're reading, you can see it, you can put the two together. That makes a difference, reading and seeing it at the same time. Another thing to do is, if you didn't want to do that, is you can have the text right in front of you. All of Shakespeare's plays, you can get the full texts online, you know, it's the internet. Is to have the read along with it, just read it, and then listen to the dialogue like a radio play, as if you're listening to a radio play. That helps. I have no problem with using Spark Notes or Cliff Notes or any of those things. In fact, I highly recommend it. There's nothing wrong with going to Wikipedia and just reading the plot summary before you watch one of these plays. I mean, right to the end, right to, you know, revealing the end. Get a sense of where this whole thing is going, so you can really sort of not worry about that and just kind of focus on other things. In fact, if you go to Spark Notes on the internet, you know, or if you have the Cliff Notes, you can look at you know, a scene by scene analysis and summary. I don't think there's anything wrong with doing that. And don't be afraid to, you know, take your time watching it. You know, some Shakespeare plays are 2-3 hours. Hamlet's 4 hours. Take your time, watch it for an hour, to go do something else, come back to it. But feel free to use materials that'll help you along. You know, it's okay to have a cheat sheet. It's not a test. You know, so it's, in fact, I would say it's very helpful to sort of do a little plot summary before you read, or character analysis. You know, read about the characters a little bit in Spark Notes or whatever before you go forward. Spark Notes even has No Fear Shakespeare, which actually does a translation, side-by-side translation into a modern English text, which you might find helpful. That's kind of hard to follow if you're trying to watch it and read these two things at the same time, but still, if you want to check it out, it's there. It exists. But I don't think there's anything wrong with doing any kind of little extra homework before you watch the play, like reading the whole plot summary, reading the Wikipedia page, going to Spark Notes, doing scene-to-scene summaries. Nothing wrong with that. That actually helps. I do that. It's actually quite wonderful. Feel free to do it. Okay, so what should you watch? What shouldn't you watch? If you want a true Shakespeare experience, you want filmed stage productions of the plays. That they'll be mostly looking very Elizabethan in character, and they'll want to do the whole length. If you watch film productions, you're going to get a sense of more of Hollywood and scenery, and that's cool, but Hollywood always alters Shakespeare. That's not necessarily a terrible thing. Orson Welles invented that. He was the first one to say, look, Shakespeare needs to be edited, you know, it's not scripture, it needs to be edited for movies, and people thought that was so sacrilegious that he did that. But everybody does it now. But if you're watching a movie version of, say, Macbeth, it's going to be very much shortened because of, you know, people's attention spans in movie theaters. You're really only be watching half Macbeth, unless you're watching the Kenneth Branagh version. You're only going to be watching maybe half of Macbeth if it's 2 hours. Even if it's 2.5 hours, it's a condensed version. That's not terrible, but you should know that. If you want to get the full Shakespeare experience, you want to look at the BBC collection of Shakespeare plays that was put on between the mid-70s to the mid-80s. Some PBS stuff, that will be more full. in terms of Shakespeare. Movie productions aren't bad. Another thing that happens with movies to be wary of is that you kind of get caught up in the stars, meaning like who's in this movie, and you might miss other things. So, for example, I find that if I watch Taming of the Shrew with Richard Burton and Elizabeth Taylor, I am more focused on those two as actual human beings than them as Petruchio and and Kate. I'm I'm thinking about what are they doing backstage at the end of the scene? Are they having sex in their trailers? I'm thinking about their romance. It's hard to focus on what's going on. If you watch the Mel Gibson Hamlet, you're going to be really focused on Mel Gibson, as opposed to Hamlet himself, maybe. So keep that in mind too if you're watching the productions. Now here's something that I have to say, and I think everyone and all my British fans of NFGeeks will be happy that I'm saying it, and I hate to say it, but it's true, and that is I think you should avoid American productions of Shakespeare in general. I don't know what it is. I know we all allegedly speak the same language, but some kind of disconnect takes place with that. Some serious disconnect. Stay away from the American productions. It somehow it falls flat. I don't know why that is. Especially if, and I hate to say it, if with actors from the Midwest. There's something about the Midwestern accent that just kills Shakespeare. I don't know. The greatest example of this is there's a version of Julius Caesar with Charlton Heston and Jason Robards. Now, Jason Robards is an Academy Award-winning actor. Okay, top-notch guy. But his delivery of Brutus's lines are horribly flat, with no life, terrible, and there's something just about that Midwestern accent that just doesn't do it. Now, if you're from the Midwest, don't panic. You know what Midwestern accents are great for? Astronauts. Nothing says I'm a kick-ass astronaut, I'm going to save the space station and the space shuttle in the day like a Midwestern accent. And NASA too, actually. Midwestern accents are great for NASA. Anybody in mission control. So I got a space movie. Midwestern accents are a must. Number one, the hero should have a Midwestern accent. But something with Shakespeare just takes a dip. In American productions in general, even under British control, in Hamlet, Kenneth Branagh's Hamlet, you have Billy Crystal in it, and Billy Crystal almost ruins it. He's not that good. I mean, he does a great job, for Billy Crystal, but he plays the gravedigger. He almost ruins it. Jack Lemmon does a much better job in it. I mean, Kenneth Branagh's doing a good job with him, but you can tell it's. I don't want to say it's not forced, but you can tell it's well practiced. It's not coming naturally for Jack Lemmon to do it. Ironically, the only person in that movie, in that Hamlet American, that does Shakespeare that seems sort of flowing is Robin Williams, which is kind of amusing. But still, it's shaky ground. So I really think you should stay away from the American productions. Stick with your British productions. Stick with your Patrick Stewart and your Ian McClellans and your David Tennants and your Kenneth Branaghs and your Sir Laurence Olivier. Watch all the Sir Laurence Oliviers if you can. I certainly recommend that. All right, so that's it. I hope you enjoy Shakespeare Week. I think it'll be very fascinating. I'm sure everybody will have a lot to say. I know I have a lot to say already. And the next video, if you want to catch up on watching, the next video I'm going to talk about is Romeo and Juliet. We're going to get Romeo and Juliet, just get it right out of the way. Just knock it right off. So watch Romeo and Juliet for tomorrow night, and we'll have a wonderful discussion about it. So thanks for watching.